What if you walked into a room where you were the only one who looked like you? How would you make your voice heard? Marcus Jenkins knew that feeling all too well. The high school auditorium buzzed with chatter, students whispering and shifting in their seats as the spotlight prepared to shine on the next speaker. Marcus sat quietly, his heart pounding in his chest like a drum, nerves tightening every muscle in his body. This was the advanced public speaking class at Eastwood High, a school nestled in a quiet suburban town where the students were mostly white, and Marcus was the only black student. He had spent the past semester blending into the background, careful not to draw attention, but today was different. Today, he was going to speak. The weight of every skeptical glance and whispered doubt felt heavy on his shoulders, but beneath it all was a quiet fire, one that refused to be extinguished. The topic of his speech was raw and personal, a story of identity, struggle, and hope. As Marcus stood and approached the podium, the room fell silent. Every eye was on him. The question he asked in his opening line echoed through the room: what does it mean to be the only one who stands apart? The silence stretched for a beat longer than expected, the room waiting for answers. Marcus's voice, though shaky at first, grew stronger with every word. He told the story of growing up in Detroit, the pride of his family, the challenges he faced navigating spaces where he often felt invisible or misunderstood. He spoke not just for himself, but for every young person who felt alone in a crowd, unheard in a world that preferred silence. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Marcus had learned to ask questions that invited connection because he believed no one should ever feel truly alone. The room listened, some skeptical, others moved, many silent but attentive. In that moment, Marcus realized his voice carried weight. It was not just the speech, it was a declaration, a refusal to be unseen. Yet, the journey to this podium had been far from easy. The months leading here were filled with doubt, microaggressions, and moments that tested his resolve. But there was also hope, hope born from friendships, mentors, and a family that never stopped believing. The story Marcus was about to tell would not only challenge the room but also himself. As the applause started, growing from hesitant claps to a roaring standing ovation, Marcus felt something shift inside him. This was only the beginning. What if you suddenly lost everything and had no one by your side? That question haunted Marcus's early years and fueled the fire that now burned brighter than ever. Today, he was no longer invisible. Today, his voice was impossible to ignore. Marcus Jenkins grew up in a small, worn-down apartment block on the east side of Detroit, a city known for its resilience but also its scars. His mother, Denise, worked 2 jobs, day shifts at a local diner and night shifts cleaning offices, to keep the lights on and food on the table. From an early age, Marcus understood what sacrifice meant. His earliest memories were filled with the comforting smell of his grandmother's cooking, the sound of old jazz records playing softly in the background, and the stories she told about their family's roots, about overcoming adversity and holding on to pride no matter the odds. Marcus's grandmother had been a schoolteacher who inspired him with tales of black leaders and dreamers, of people who refused to be broken by the world around them. Those stories became the foundation of his identity. At school, things were different. Marcus attended predominantly white schools from middle school onward after his mother pushed for him to get a better education than what the neighborhood offered. That decision came with a price. He was the only black student in many of his classes and often felt like an outsider. The stares, the sideways glances, the whispered jokes he sometimes overheard weren't easy to ignore. Sometimes, teachers overlooked his questions or misread his quiet confidence as disinterest. Yet, Marcus carried himself with dignity, knowing that he was more than the sum of the stereotypes others tried to place on him. His best friend Jamal had been there since childhood, someone who understood Marcus in ways no one else did. They had grown up playing basketball on cracked concrete courts and dreaming about a future bigger than the blocks that trapped them. Jamal's energy was contagious, his laughter a reminder that even when the world was heavy, joy could be found. Denise always told Marcus that his voice was powerful and that telling his story could change things, if only he dared to speak up. That message stayed with him. In middle school, Marcus discovered he had a gift for storytelling. Teachers praised his essays and speeches, and though the spotlight made him nervous, it also gave him a sense of purpose. When he got the chance to join the public speaking class at Eastwood High, it felt like a step towards something greater. But the adjustment wasn't easy. The school was located in a quiet suburb where most students came from families who had never struggled like his. Marcus felt the divide every day, the differences in experiences, in background, in opportunity. It wasn't just about race, it was about belonging. He watched classmates joke casually about vacations to Europe, about summer camps he had never heard of. He kept his stories close, sometimes hesitant to share because he feared being seen as different or pitted. His mother noticed the weight Marcus carried. One evening, after a particularly hard day at school when Marcus came home frustrated and nearly in tears, Denise sat him down. "You're going to face people who don't get you, son," she said softly, "but your story is worth telling. Don't ever shrink yourself to make others comfortable." Those words rang in Marcus's ears through the hardest moments. Over time, he learned to channel his frustration into his speeches, weaving in his truth with courage. Yet, loneliness lingered. Being the only black student in the room meant sometimes feeling invisible even when standing in plain sight. Sometimes it was the small things, a teacher mispronouncing his name, a classmate asking if he played basketball like a stereotype. But Marcus didn't let those moments define him. Instead, he used them as fuel. He worked late into the night refining his speeches, practicing in front of the cracked mirror in his room. His grandmother's stories, his mother's sacrifices, Jamal's unwavering support, they were the pillars holding him up. At school, Ms. Ramirez, his public speaking teacher, was one of the few adults who saw Marcus not as a statistic but as a young man with potential. She encouraged him to push boundaries, to speak not just for himself but for those whose voices were silenced. With her guidance, Marcus began to believe that his voice could be more than just a whisper in a crowded room. Outside of school, Marcus and Jamal talked late into the night, dreaming about college, about breaking cycles, about proving that their pasts didn't dictate their futures. Jamal was the fire to Marcus's calm, a balance that kept him grounded. Marcus often thought about the community he came from, the neighbors who looked out for each other, the elders who had fought battles he could only imagine. That history was in his blood. Sometimes, Marcus felt torn between worlds, the tough streets of Detroit and the polished halls of Eastwood High. Neither felt fully like home, but both shaped who he was becoming. These conflicting feelings stirred inside him like a storm. Marcus wasn't just a student, he was a young man wrestling with identity, with expectations, with hope. At times, the weight of being the only black student in the room felt unbearable. He longed for connection but feared rejection. He wanted to be seen for who he truly was, not just a symbol or an exception. As he prepared for his big speech in that advanced class, all these pieces came together. He wasn't just speaking for a grade, he was speaking for every kid who felt invisible, every person who had been told their story didn't matter. Marcus's journey was one of courage, of finding strength in vulnerability. The shadows of his past and the light of his dreams collided in a way that only made him stronger. His speech wasn't just words, it was a bridge between who he was and who he hoped to become. Through every struggle, every moment of doubt, Marcus held on to one truth, that his voice was powerful enough to change the room, and maybe even the world. From the moment Marcus stepped into Eastwood High, he knew the road wouldn't be smooth, but nothing prepared him for the quiet battles that would shape his days. The public speaking class was supposed to be his chance to shine, yet every step forward seemed met with invisible barriers. His classmates often greeted him with forced smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes, and he could feel the weight of their assumptions hanging in the air. It was subtle at first, a snide remark here, a dismissive glance there, but over time, those microaggressions piled up like bricks in a wall separating him from the rest. One afternoon during rehearsal, Marcus shared the topic of his speech, a personal story about his experiences navigating identity as the only black student in the room. As he spoke, Jake, the most popular kid in class, smirked loudly and whispered something to his friends. Later, Marcus overheard Jake joking, "What's he gonna say? That he's some kind of hero or something?" It stung, but Marcus kept his composure, reminding himself that their ignorance was not his burden to carry. Ms. Ramirez, his teacher, noticed the tension and pulled Marcus aside after class. "Don't let them dim your light," she said gently, "your story is needed, even if they don't see it yet." At home, the struggle continued. Denise was proud but worried. She had faced discrimination her entire life and feared that Marcus would be swallowed by it. One night, after Marcus came home frustrated from school, she sat him down at their small kitchen table. "I know it's hard," she said, her voice steady despite the exhaustion in her eyes. "People might not always be kind, but you've got a fire inside you. Use it. Don't let their doubt define your truth." Marcus nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. He knew she was right, but the loneliness pressed down on him like a heavy blanket. His best friend Jamal was his anchor. Whenever Marcus felt overwhelmed, Jamal was there with a joke, a pep talk, or just silent support. "Man, you've got this," Jamal told him one evening as they tossed a basketball back and forth under the dim streetlights. "People don't know what you're capable of, 'cause they're too busy looking in their own little bubble." Despite the support, the challenges kept coming. One day, during a group project, a classmate questioned Marcus's ability to lead. "Maybe someone else should take charge," she said, barely disguising her skepticism. Marcus clenched his fists but didn't argue. He decided to prove her wrong through action, pushing himself harder. The school hallways whispered stories of prejudice, but Marcus was determined to rewrite his own. Each small victory was a battle won, but each battle took its toll. The nights were the hardest. Alone in his room, Marcus wrestled with doubt. Was his voice enough? Would anyone truly listen? Yet, in those quiet moments, he remembered his grandmother's stories, his mother's sacrifices, and Jamal's unwavering belief. That hope sparked a light in the darkness. Then came the turning point, a tense moment that shook Marcus to his core. During a rehearsal, Jake openly mocked Marcus's speech topic, "What's next?" telling us about your struggle again. The classroom fell silent, the air thick with discomfort. Marcus felt anger rise but forced himself to stay calm. Ms. Ramirez stepped in firmly, reminding the class of respect and the power of stories. That day, Marcus realized that the fight was bigger than just one speech. It was about breaking through walls built by misunderstanding and fear. There were moments of hope too. Ms. Ramirez often stayed after class to help Marcus polish his speech, encouraging him to be bold and authentic. Some classmates began to listen, asking questions, expressing curiosity instead of judgment. Marcus found strength in these small signs of change. But just as hope blossomed, another challenge struck. Rumors started spreading about Marcus, fueled by jealousy and ignorance. Whispers that he was seeking attention or playing the victim stung deeply. Marcus faced a new kind of isolation, this time born from misunderstanding rather than blatant hostility. It was a confusing and painful time. At home, Denise saw the toll it was taking. One evening, she wrapped her arms around Marcus, holding him close. "You're not alone," she whispered. "No matter what they say, you've got people who believe in you." Jamal reminded Marcus of their shared dreams and the promise they made to each other, to rise above and make a difference. "You're stronger than you know," Jamal said, "and this? This is just a chapter, not the whole story." Through the ups and downs, Marcus clung to hope. He rewrote his speech several times, each draft more personal than the last. He added stories of pain and triumph, moments of fear and courage. His voice grew clearer, more confident. The tension in the school was palpable as the speech day neared. Some students whispered doubts, others waited to see if Marcus would falter. But Marcus was ready. This speech was more than a grade, it was a statement, a challenge, and a beacon. The rising conflict was not just with others but within Marcus himself. Doubts battled hope, fear wrestled with courage. Yet every struggle was shaping him into someone ready to stand tall, to be seen and heard. Marcus's story was far from over, but one thing was certain, he would not be silent. The week before the speech was a whirlwind of emotions and preparation for Marcus. Each day, he carried a growing weight of expectation, not only from his classmates and teachers but from himself. The pressure threatened to overwhelm him, but deep inside, there was a fierce determination to rise above it all. Early mornings were spent revising his speech, late nights practicing in front of the cracked mirror in his bedroom, sometimes pacing the worn wooden floors as he searched for the perfect words to express his truth. The classroom itself seemed different now, no longer just a place of learning but an arena where Marcus would face his fears head-on. As he entered that room each day, he noticed the subtle changes, a few more eyes holding his gaze, a less dismissive tone when people spoke to him. The shift wasn't immediate, but it was there. One afternoon, Marcus arrived early to find Ms. Ramirez setting up for class. "You're ready for this," she said, her eyes full of pride. "Remember, your story matters. Speak it loud." Her words echoed in Marcus's mind as he stood alone in the empty auditorium that evening, the rows of empty seats stretching out before him like an ocean of possibility and challenge. He imagined the faces of his classmates, the skeptical glances, the hopeful ones, and felt the full weight of the moment. The gym lights cast long shadows, the silence wrapping around him like a cloak. With trembling hands, Marcus began practicing aloud. Each sentence carried years of struggle, moments of pain, and bursts of hope. He described the cracked sidewalks of Detroit where he learned to dream, the sacrifices his mother made to give him a chance, and the invisible walls he faced every day at school. His voice grew steadier with each repetition, the words flowing like a river breaking through ice. Outside, the summer sun dipped low, casting golden light through the tall windows. Marcus paused, took a deep breath, and looked out over the empty seats. The space felt like a challenge and a promise. If he could fill it with truth, maybe he could change how others saw him. That week brought unexpected moments too. In the hallway, a classmate named Emily approached him quietly. "I didn't get what you said in class yesterday, but I want to understand." It was the first time someone outside his circle asked without judgment, and Marcus felt a flicker of hope. Emily's words reminded him that sometimes, all it took was one person willing to listen to start breaking down walls. But challenges remained. One afternoon, as Marcus was leaving school, he overheard a group of students laughing and making cruel jokes about his speech topic. The sting of their words hit harder than before, but instead of retreating, Marcus chose to confront the pain head-on. He called Jamal that night, and they talked until the early hours about strength, resilience, and the power of storytelling. "You're not just telling your story," Jamal said. "You're giving a voice to a lot of people who don't get the chance. That's powerful." On the day before the speech, Marcus's family gathered at their apartment. Denise looked at him with tears in her eyes and said, "You're already a champion to me. No matter what happens tomorrow, you've made us proud." His grandmother handed him a small, worn notebook filled with quotes and encouragement, her way of passing on the legacy of strength and hope. That night, Marcus lay awake thinking about everything that had led to this moment, the pain, the struggle, the laughter, the love. He knew that tomorrow, when he stood before the room, he would be vulnerable, exposed, but also powerful. The speech wasn't just about being heard, it was about being understood. When the day finally arrived, the atmosphere in the classroom was charged with anticipation. Students whispered, teachers exchanged glances, and Marcus felt the familiar flutter of nerves in his stomach. But this time, he embraced it. As he stepped to the podium, his heart pounding, he looked out and saw Jamal sitting in the back, giving him a thumbs up. That small gesture steadied his resolve. Marcus began with a calm voice, weaving stories from his childhood with reflections on identity and belonging. He didn't shy away from the hard truths, about racism, isolation, and resilience, but also shared moments of joy, hope, and connection. The room shifted from skepticism to silence. Some faces softened, others looked stunned. When he finished, there was a beat of silence before the room erupted into applause. It was not just polite clapping, it was recognition, respect, and, for some, a moment of awakening. Afterward, a surprising moment unfolded. Jake, the same student who had mocked him before, stood up and approached Marcus. "Hey, man, I was wrong. Your story, it made me think. I'm sorry for how I acted." The apology stunned Marcus and the room alike. It was a turning point, a crack in the wall of judgment that had separated them. That day marked the beginning of a new chapter, not just for Marcus but for the entire school community. His journey had taken him from isolation to connection, from silence to a powerful voice that demanded to be heard. The road ahead was still uncertain, but Marcus knew one thing: he had crossed a threshold. He was no longer just the only black student in the room. He was a leader, a storyteller, and a catalyst for change. As the applause faded and the room emptied, Marcus felt a quiet peace settle within him. The journey had been hard, but it was worth every moment. The challenges were not over, but now he carried something stronger than fear: hope. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The moment Marcus had been preparing for all semester finally arrived, but it was far more intense than he had imagined. Standing at the front of the auditorium, the weight of every eye locked on him made his heart hammer against his ribs like a wild drum. His palms were sweaty, his throat dry, yet a fire burned deep inside him, fueled by months of struggle, rejection, and hope. He began speaking, his voice steady but filled with raw emotion as he recounted the moments that shaped him: the late nights at the diner watching his mother work tirelessly, the days at school where he felt invisible despite sitting in plain sight, the whispered insults and the stares that cut deeper than words. His words painted vivid pictures of a boy who refused to be defined by the color of his skin or the circumstances he was born into. The room was silent, hanging on every sentence. Then, halfway through, Marcus shared the hardest truth. The feeling of loneliness that had crept into his life like a shadow. "There were days," he said, voice barely above a whisper, "when I felt like giving up. When the world seemed too heavy to carry, and I was so tired of fighting just to be seen." The admission shocked the room. For the first time, Marcus saw vulnerability reflected in his classmates' eyes. He wasn't just the other anymore, he was human, with fears and dreams just like them. But then, just as the tension seemed to reach its peak, Marcus shifted tone. He spoke of hope, hope born from the unwavering love of his family, from the encouragement of friends like Jamal, and from the belief that change was possible if he dared to stand tall. "I learned that being the only one in the room doesn't mean you have to be alone," Marcus said, his voice growing stronger, "because when you speak your truth, you find your tribe, even in the most unexpected places." A murmur of appreciation rippled through the crowd, breaking the heavy silence. Marcus's speech was a journey, a climb from despair to hope, from isolation to connection. As he reached the conclusion, the audience was visibly moved, some wiping away tears, others nodding in quiet understanding. Just then, an unexpected moment shattered the fragile calm. From the back of the room, Jake, the classmate who had once mocked Marcus, stood and clapped slowly, then rose to his feet. "I wasn't the easiest to get along with," Jake admitted, his voice carrying across the room. "But Marcus, your words hit me harder than I expected. I'm sorry for how I treated you. You showed all of us what real courage looks like." The room erupted in applause, louder and more genuine than before. Marcus felt a rush of relief and pride, but also something deeper, a connection he hadn't dared to hope for. Tears blurred his vision, but his smile was radiant. It was a moment of truth and reconciliation. Later that day, Marcus sat with Ms. Ramirez, reflecting on what had happened. "You didn't just give a speech," she said softly. "You broke down barriers. You changed minds. Marcus nodded, still processing the whirlwind of emotions. "It wasn't just me," he said. "It was all the people who believed in me, who fought beside me, even when I doubted myself." That night, back at home, Denise hugged Marcus tightly. "You've come so far," she whispered, "and you've given us all hope." Marcus realized then that his journey was not just about speaking in front of a room, it was about healing wounds, his own and those of the community around him. The emotional climax was not just in the words he spoke, but in the hearts he touched. In the days that followed, Marcus noticed subtle but meaningful changes. Conversations that once skirted around race became more open. Classmates who had ignored him now sought his friendship or asked questions. The school began planning a diversity initiative, inspired by his courage to speak out. Marcus felt a new sense of purpose stirring inside him. His voice, once uncertain and quiet, had become a force for change. But the road ahead still held challenges. Some old wounds remained, and the work of building understanding was just beginning. Yet Marcus no longer feared the silence. He had learned that even in the darkest moments, hope could light the way. The emotional climax marked not an end, but a powerful new beginning, for Marcus, his family, and everyone who had listened and started to see him not as the only black student in the room, but as a leader who spoke truth to power. The days after the speech felt like waking up from a long, restless dream. The halls of Eastwood High buzzed with a different energy, a fragile yet undeniable shift that seemed to ripple through the walls. Marcus noticed it in the way his classmates greeted him, no longer with suspicion or indifference, but with genuine smiles and curiosity. Teachers, too, spoke with new warmth, some even sharing their own stories of struggle and hope. The change wasn't instant or complete, but it was real, and it gave Marcus a sense of peace he hadn't known he could feel at school. At home, Denise watched her son with a quiet pride, sensing the growth not only in his confidence but in his heart. One evening, as they sat together on the worn couch, Denise asked softly, "What did you learn from all of this?" Marcus thought for a moment before answering. "That being different doesn't mean being alone. That sometimes the hardest battles teach you the most about who you are, and who you can become." His words echoed the lessons he had absorbed from his mother's sacrifices, his grandmother's wisdom, and the support of friends who refused to let him give up. That night, as he lay in bed, Marcus reflected on the journey, how far he had come from the boy who once doubted his place in the world. He understood now that his voice was a gift, one that could open doors not just for himself but for others who felt invisible. Back at school, the diversity initiative Marcus inspired began taking shape. Students formed a group dedicated to fostering understanding and empathy. Meetings were filled with honest conversations, workshops, and moments of shared vulnerability. Marcus found himself not just a participant but a leader, guiding others to embrace their stories and learn from one another. One afternoon, Ms. Ramirez pulled him aside. "You've done something special here," she said, her eyes shining. "You've planted seeds that will grow for years." Marcus smiled, feeling the weight of responsibility but also the joy of possibility. Yet, even amid progress, Marcus remained grounded. He knew that life wasn't about perfection but about growth, about continuing to rise after every fall. There were still moments of doubt, days when old fears crept back, but he met them with resilience. Jamal, ever his steadfast friend, reminded him, every step forward counts, even the small ones. Family remained the foundation. Denise's quiet sacrifices and unwavering belief were a constant source of strength. Marcus often thought of his grandmother's worn notebook, filled with wisdom that had guided generations. It was a reminder that love and perseverance were the true legacies we leave behind. One Sunday afternoon, as Marcus helped Denise prepare dinner, she shared a story from her youth. About a time when she too faced obstacles and felt the sting of exclusion. "But I learned something important," she said, her voice steady. "Life will try to knock you down, but love will always lead the way back up." Those words settled deep in Marcus's heart. They became the mantra that carried him through challenges and triumphs alike. As the school year drew to a close, Marcus stood before a new group of students, sharing his story once more, not as the only black student in the room, but as someone who had found strength in his truth. The applause that followed was filled with respect and hope, a testament to how far he had come. Looking ahead, Marcus knew that his journey was far from over. The road to understanding and equality was long and winding. But he was no longer afraid. With each step, he carried the lessons of love, sacrifice, and courage. He had become more than a speech, he had become a symbol of change, a reminder that even in the darkest rooms, a single voice could light the way. Life was full of surprises, and Marcus had learned the most important one of all, that love, above all, would always lead the way. As summer faded into fall, Marcus stepped into a new school year with a mixture of anticipation and cautious optimism. The victory of his speech was still fresh in his mind, but he knew that real change was a long, ongoing process. The applause had faded, but the work was far from over. The hallways still carried whispers, some curious, some critical, but Marcus was different now. He walked with a quiet confidence, the kind that comes not from winning approval but from knowing your own worth. Yet, with new confidence came new challenges. At the start of the semester, Marcus was selected to join the student council, a role that thrust him into the heart of school politics and social dynamics. Suddenly, he found himself navigating a landscape filled with alliances, rivalries, and unspoken rules. Not everyone welcomed his presence, especially those who saw his rise as a threat to the status quo. One meeting stood out. As Marcus presented an initiative to promote inclusive activities, he was met with resistance from a faction of students who dismissed his ideas as too focused on one group. The word stung, but Marcus didn't back down. He explained how inclusion wasn't about division but about creating space for everyone to feel seen and valued. It was a tough battle, but Marcus learned to stand firm without losing his voice to anger or frustration. Outside of school, the pressures of family and life pulled at him in new ways. Denise's health had started to decline, a reality that weighed heavily on Marcus. He balanced his schoolwork, leadership roles, and caring for his mother with a maturity beyond his years. The quiet moments at home were filled with worry and love, moments that reminded Marcus of what truly mattered. In the midst of these challenges, Jamal remained a steadfast pillar. Their friendship, forged in the fires of adversity, grew stronger. They talked about dreams and fears, about the future and the weight of responsibility. Jamal encouraged Marcus to keep pushing boundaries, to keep speaking out even when it felt like no one was listening. "Change doesn't come easy," Jamal said one afternoon as they sat by the river, the sun dipping low behind the city skyline. "But it's worth fighting for." School events brought new opportunities for Marcus to connect and lead. He organized a cultural festival celebrating the diverse backgrounds of Eastwood High students. The event was a huge success, bringing together students who had rarely crossed paths before. Marcus saw firsthand the power of community and the importance of celebrating differences rather than fearing them. But even as Marcus grew, so did the challenges. A social media controversy erupted when someone posted a distorted version of his speech, sparking heated debates and unfair criticism. The virtual world, with its rapid-fire judgments and echo chambers, was a new battlefield. Marcus faced harsh words from strangers and old classmates alike. The pain was real, but so was his resilience. Supported by Denise, Jamal, and Ms. Ramirez, he learned to navigate this storm with grace and strength. He refused to let negativity silence his truth. One night, after a particularly difficult day, Marcus found himself alone in his room, scrolling through messages that ranged from supportive to cruel. His heart ached, but then he opened a letter from a younger student who wrote, "Your story gave me hope when I felt invisible. Thank you for being brave." Tears welled up as Marcus realized the ripple effect of his journey. The fights he faced were not just his own, they were part of a larger story of courage and change. As the semester continued, Marcus also discovered a passion for mentoring younger students, helping them find their voices and navigate their own challenges. He volunteered at community centers and after-school programs, sharing his story and listening to theirs. These moments grounded him, reminding Marcus of the power of connection and empathy. The chapter of new challenges was also one of growth. Marcus learned that leadership wasn't just about standing at the front of the room but about lifting others up, about patience and persistence. He learned to embrace imperfection, to forgive himself when things went wrong, and to celebrate every small victory. Through all the ups and downs, Marcus held on to the lessons of love and sacrifice that had shaped him. He understood that true strength came not from never falling but from rising again, again and again. As the year went on, Marcus found himself more hopeful than ever. The journey was far from over, but he was ready to face whatever came next, with courage, heart, and a voice that would not be silenced. The turning leaves outside mirrored the changes Marcus was experiencing inside. What began as a quiet shift was now blossoming into something stronger, unexpected allies emerging in places he least expected. After the social media storm and the battles in student council, Marcus found himself surrounded by new faces who believed in his vision. These weren't just classmates looking to join a popular cause, they were individuals from all walks of life, each bringing their own stories of struggle and resilience. One afternoon, during a lunch break, Marcus noticed Sarah, a quiet girl from the art club, sitting alone under a tree. She had always kept to herself, rarely speaking up in class. Marcus remembered her sketchbooks filled with powerful drawings reflecting themes of identity and pain. He approached her, offering a simple smile and a question about her artwork. Sarah's eyes lit up, and from that moment on, a friendship began to grow. She shared how she had often felt like an outsider, too scared to voice her opinions. With Marcus's encouragement, Sarah started to join the diversity meetings and even helped design posters for upcoming events. Her creativity became a vital force in the movement, reminding everyone that change could be expressed not just in words but through art and emotion. Meanwhile, another unexpected ally came from the faculty. Mr. Thompson, the usually reserved history teacher, began incorporating discussions about race, identity, and social justice into his lessons. He cited Marcus's speech as a catalyst for these changes, and students noticed a newfound openness in the classroom. During one heated debate about civil rights, Marcus and Mr. Thompson exchanged thoughtful perspectives, deepening Marcus's understanding of history and the ongoing fight for equality. This mentorship was a gift Marcus hadn't anticipated but deeply cherished. Even some former critics began to soften. Jake, who had apologized after Marcus's speech, continued to show signs of change. He invited Marcus to join a basketball game, an olive branch that surprised both of them. On the court, barriers broke down through shared laughter and friendly competition. Their budding friendship became a symbol of what was possible when people dared to look beyond stereotypes. Yet, the path wasn't without hurdles. At a school assembly, Marcus was confronted by a small group of students who still harbored resentment. They challenged his ideas, questioning whether his activism was divisive. Instead of reacting with anger, Marcus listened calmly, acknowledging their concerns while sharing his belief in unity and understanding. This moment of grace earned respect from many onlookers and showed Marcus how leadership required not only passion but patience. Outside school, Marcus continued to balance family life and his growing role as a community leader. Denise's health remained fragile, but her spirit was unbreakable. One evening, she sat beside Marcus as he prepared notes for a speech at a city youth forum. "Remember," she said, "your voice is a light for others. Never doubt its power." Those words stayed with him as he stood before a diverse crowd of young people, sharing his journey and listening to theirs. The forum was electric with energy and hope. Marcus realized that his story was not unique, it was part of a larger tapestry woven from countless threads of courage and determination. The unexpected allies Marcus found were a reminder that change was a collective effort, born from the willingness of individuals to stand together. As winter approached, the movement at Eastwood High gained momentum. Fundraisers, workshops, and community projects brought students and teachers closer. Marcus felt a deep sense of belonging, no longer the isolated boy from his first day of school but a leader inspiring others to embrace their identities and stories. Reflecting on this transformation, Marcus understood that the strength of a community lay in its diversity and the respect each person showed for one another. He thought back to the lonely days, the whispered insults, and the doubts that once consumed him. Now, surrounded by unexpected allies and fueled by hope, Marcus saw the future not as a daunting unknown but as a canvas waiting to be painted with the colors of change, courage, and love. The months following the formation of Marcus's growing circle of allies felt like the calm before a storm. The energy was high, the community engaged, and hope was palpable, but deep down, Marcus knew the true test of his journey was still ahead. Change was never easy or linear, and the challenges he faced now would push him beyond what he had previously endured. One chilly morning, news broke that the school board was considering cutting funding for the very diversity programs Marcus and his peers had worked so hard to establish. The announcement hit the student body like a shockwave. For Marcus, it felt personal, as if all the progress he had fought for was hanging by a thread. The room where the board meeting was to be held was packed. Parents, students, and teachers gathered, each carrying the weight of their hopes and fears. When Marcus stepped up to speak, the familiar nervousness crept in, but it was overpowered by his resolve. He began by recounting the impact the programs had made, not just in improving school culture but in saving lives, giving students a voice, and fostering understanding. His words were raw, filled with conviction, and echoed by the heartfelt testimonies of his friends and teachers who spoke after him. Yet, the opposition was fierce. Some board members argued that the funds could be better spent elsewhere, dismissing the programs as unnecessary or politically charged. The tension was thick, and the room seemed to hold its breath. After hours of debate, the decision was postponed, but the threat remained real. Marcus left the meeting drained but determined. He knew this fight was bigger than just budget lines, it was a test of values, of whether the school would stand by its commitment to inclusion and equity. Back at school, the atmosphere shifted. Some students felt discouraged, others rallied. Marcus and his team organized petitions, awareness campaigns, and meetings with local officials. It was exhausting, often frustrating work, but Marcus's leadership shone brightest in these moments. He reminded everyone that the struggle for justice was ongoing and required persistence. Meanwhile, at home, Denise's condition worsened, adding a layer of personal grief to Marcus's already heavy burden. He juggled hospital visits, homework, and activism with a grace that surprised even him. One night, after a particularly difficult day, Marcus found himself sitting beside Denise, holding her hand. "Why do you keep fighting so hard?" she asked softly. Marcus looked into her tired eyes and replied, "Because I want a better world, not just for me, but for everyone. And because I know I'm not alone." Those words, spoken in a quiet hospital room, reminded Marcus of the power of faith, not just in a higher power, but in people, in community, and in the possibility of change. As winter gave way to spring, the school board finally voted. In a nail-biting decision, they approved partial funding for the programs but warned that future support depended on continued results. It was a compromise, but Marcus accepted it with cautious optimism. The fight had not ended, but the victory fueled his resolve. With renewed energy, Marcus and his allies redoubled their efforts, determined to prove the value of their work. They organized more events, gathered data, and shared stories that highlighted the program's impact. The journey tested Marcus's faith in others and in himself. There were moments of doubt when the opposition seemed overwhelming, when fatigue threatened to consume him. But each time, he found strength in the faces of the students whose lives had changed, in the encouragement of friends like Jamal, and in the enduring love of his family. One afternoon, Ms. Ramirez handed Marcus a letter from a local university offering him a scholarship, recognizing his leadership and commitment to social justice. The news was a beacon of hope, a reminder that his efforts were being seen beyond the walls of Eastwood High. As the school year ended, Marcus reflected on how far he had come. The journey from being the only black student in the room to becoming a catalyst for change had been filled with pain, growth, and triumph. The test of faith had strengthened him, deepening his understanding that true leadership meant enduring hardship with grace and holding on to hope even when the path was unclear. In the quiet moments before graduation, Marcus stood at the edge of the stage, ready to deliver the valedictory address. His voice was steady as he spoke of resilience, community, and the power of a single voice to spark a movement. The room erupted in applause, but Marcus knew the real work lay ahead. His story was not just his own, it was a call to action for all who heard it, to stand up, speak out, and believe in the possibility of a better tomorrow. The test of faith was not an end but a beginning, and Marcus was ready to face whatever challenges the future held, with courage, love, and unwavering hope. Graduation day at Eastwood High was a blur of excitement, nerves, and reflection. Marcus stood backstage, the weight of the moment settling over him. He was no longer the boy who had walked into a room feeling invisible and alone. Today, he was a young man who had turned silence into speech, isolation into community, and doubt into hope. As the ceremony began, Marcus's name was called for the valedictory address. The auditorium fell silent, every eye on him, every ear waiting. He took a deep breath, feeling the presence of his mother, Denise, his friends like Jamal and Sarah, his teachers, and even those who had once doubted him. He started with a question that had defined his journey: what if you suddenly lost everything and had no one by your side? The crowd shifted, the familiar question hanging in the air, inviting them into the story that had become his life. Marcus shared his story, his fears, struggles, and the moments of hope that kept him moving forward. He spoke of the loneliness of being the only black student in the room, the power of his speech that left them speechless, and the unexpected allies who stood beside him. His voice was steady, filled with passion and authenticity. "I didn't just want to be heard," Marcus said. "I wanted to create a space where everyone could be seen, where every voice mattered. Because our differences are not what divide us, they are what make us stronger." The auditorium erupted in applause, some tears glistening in the eyes of those who had witnessed his growth. As he stepped down from the stage, Marcus felt a surge of gratitude and determination. This was not the end, it was the beginning of a new chapter. After the ceremony, Denise embraced Marcus tightly. "You've made me proud beyond words," she whispered. "You've made all of us proud." Jamal clapped him on the back. "You did it, man. You changed everything." But Marcus knew that real change was ongoing. The movement at Eastwood High continued to grow, inspiring other schools and communities. Marcus received invitations to speak at conferences, participate in panels, and mentor young leaders. Each opportunity was a chance to amplify voices like his own, to remind the world that inclusion and empathy were more than ideals, they were necessities. Yet, amid the success, Marcus remained humble. He remembered the lonely days, the doubts, and the fear. Those memories fueled his commitment to never forget where he came from and to always fight for those still searching for their place. Reflecting on his journey, Marcus understood that the speech that had left them speechless was not just about race or identity, it was about the universal human need to be understood and accepted. He thought of his mother's sacrifices, his grandmother's wisdom, and the community that had lifted him up. The lessons of love, sacrifice, and courage were the true legacy of his story. In the quiet moments that followed graduation, Marcus sat with his thoughts, dreaming of the future. He saw himself continuing to speak out, to lead with heart, and to inspire change wherever he went. Life was full of surprises, and he had learned that love would always lead the way. As the sun set on that milestone day, Marcus smiled, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, knowing his voice could change everything. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?